So good evening, welcome. My name is Arsine Isayan, and I am a co-curator here at ReflectSpace with my partner and co-curator Untitled Chapter. We curate this space called ReflectSpace, where we deal with social justice issues and human rights issues across the globe, local issues as well as global issues. And we are very, very honored tonight to be presenting an exhibition. We've had this exhibition up already for a few weeks about homelessness, and we're very honored tonight to have two of the artists who are on this exhibition in an artist talk to speak about these different issues that we are presenting here in this exhibition. And we are also very honored to have with us moderating Arsine Isayan, who is a manager of the City of Glendale Homeless Program. She is from Armenia. She studied at Northridge University, and now she works with the homeless population in Glendale. And she'll be moderating and also giving us some information about the homeless issues in Glendale and how they're dealt with by the city. And on my left here, we have Dr. Stuart Perlman, PhD, has been a psychologist and psychoanalyst for 40 years. In addition, Stuart has painted and interviewed over 250 unhoused individuals, illuminating their humanity. Fine Art Connoisseur magazine calls these portraits great art worldwide. This project has been covered internationally, including the LA Times and Guardians of London, and seen in 60 exhibitions. The National Association of Advanced Psychologists awarded this documentary, Struggle in Paradise, based on this project, Best Movie. Stuart was LACPA's Social Justice Award winner and was honored by the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. Many portraits that you will see here, you see on this wall, and that we invite you to come and actually see in person, are also in his new book called Open Your Heart Through Art. On my right, we have photographer Jeffrey A. Wolin, who is a Ruth Ann Hall's Professor Emeritus of Photography at Indiana University. His photographs have been exhibited in over 100 exhibitions in the US and in Europe, including solo shows at the Art Institute of Chicago, International Center of Photography in New York, George Eastman Museum in Rochester, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and group exhibitions at MoMA Whitney Museum, the LA County Museum of Art, and the permanent collections of numerous museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, LA County Museum of Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris, and the Museum of Modern Art, New York. We are very happy to welcome back Jeffrey, because we showed some of his work back when we first opened this gallery back in 2017. So we welcome you back with your new work. So with that, what we want to do is show a short video presenting some of the work, and then we'll let Arsine take over. Okay.
After working nearly 20 years, including as an auto and bus mechanic, nearly 10 of them as a union mechanic, I returned to writing. I worked as well in the family business until it failed in 1992. I was 37 years old. I started living in my car. Soon it was a tent on a sidewalk. 80% of the meals in the past 20 years I've eaten have now come from dumpsters, in large part because I was refusing to take any money from the government, since conservatives are always berating us poor as the ones taking big bailouts. So I mostly only ate the food that society throws away, and seeking as well to contribute, I've organized 4 different Food Not Bombs collectives. They're a global movement. When I was a working-class bus mechanic and a typical American consumer, I would gleefully go to the market and buy up all the foods advertisers want us to buy. My health wasn't good. I wasn't eating nutritious food, and my budget didn't seem to allow me to buy more nutritious foods that wealthy people can afford. But as a homeless person, I discovered that even eating from the dumpsters of organic markets was healthier than merely eating the poor food so expensively marketed to us average Americans. And surprisingly, even to me, it's here as homeless, but still contributing, that I've found now the best relationships, most peace, and best health of my entire life.
3 years ago, I had a double mastectomy and 16 lymph nodes removed from my left arm. I had 6 months of chemotherapy. I was in the process of buying a house, but had to use the money for my chemo. We ended up, which is myself and my children, at Olive Branch Mission Shelter. We had our own room, but we had no doors on the room. During that time, I cared for my kids, took them to school each day, and then went to my chemo or cancer treatment. We were able to become a part of New Hope Apartments, and they helped us find permanent stable housing, and we've been here a year. I'll graduate in May 2019 with a degree in business administration.
First time I was homeless, I was 14 years old. I was kicked out of the house. There were 7 of us. I was the oldest. My dad died when I was 6. My mom died when I was 12. My mom's brother took us in, but I wouldn't obey the rules. I've had housing on and off since then. I heard about Uptown Tent City, and I wanted to totally get involved. I got a propane stove and tank, and then started cooking for the homeless. There were about 25 of us under Lawrence and 20 under Wilson. We had each other. I got elected as mayor of Uptown Tent City. I am homeless, but I'm happy. I'm doing what I enjoy doing, helping people get housing and get them off the street.
Got a real good job with AIG Architects. Started out as a draftsman, ended up being a project coordinator. I was just a workaholic. One day I get a call from the sheriff saying that my wife and children have been killed in a car accident.
Wife and children have been killed in a car accident. What was that like?
I don't know. I can't explain it. I went crazy.
The homeless, are just people just like anyone else. They have problems just like anyone else. Sometimes maybe a little more severe problems. But, there's people who want to live and make it and it's difficult.
I used to live at 525 East Grand.
Wow.
Right here.
So how did you lose your house?
Back taxes.
Back taxes.
They didn't give me a chance to pay it.
So how many years were you in the Marine Corps?
I gave 50 years of my life to this country.
What motivated me to start this project was seeing the homeless all around me. And sometimes they would be people that would be interfering with my life. Sometimes they would block the doorway to get into my office, and patients would have trouble getting in. And I found it a real irritant. And but it broke my heart at the same time, and I wanted to do something about it. And I started painting, and I started wanting to paint interesting people, and those were the faces that I found most interesting. So you asked me if you could be painted?
Yeah.
How come you asked? What did you think?
Because you just told me I could trust you and you'd get my picture out there and my story out there. I got a long story. I've been through a lot. Like, I've been on the street since I was 12 and I'm 26 now.
I gave my legs.
Your legs.
I gave part of my body for my freedom. And your freedom too.
I know I'm not the only one. I can see all you've forgotten sons, and we are.
It is kind of lonely out here with all these people. A sense of not belonging.
I want a place to live. I want a job. I want to be accepted in society. I want to, even if it is just a job, to be just over broke and to make ends meet. I'd like to live normally.
Why don't
We listen to the voices in our hearts. Then you'll know we're not so far apart.
And covered the topic of homelessness. Did you have any experience working with this population? And if you didn't, did you have any preconceived notions prior to diving into their environment and working on these incredible art pieces?
Well, how I got involved was I have 2 PhDs, one in clinical psychology, one in psychoanalysis, and I have a great practice. And the office I moved into was a very lovely office, high rent. And a shanty town appeared on my doorstep and actually started blocking my patients from getting into my office. And then I started dealing with the people and getting to know them. And some of them actually became friends of mine. And I just felt so heartbroken that here in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, we walk over people living and dying on the streets. And it broke my heart, and I had to do something about it. And I had really never painted. And so I just started painting their faces because they were the most interesting faces with life experience etched into it, with trauma etched into it. And now 12 years later, 25 hours a week for the last 12 years, I've been doing this project, and it's been such a powerful experience. I've worked for 45 years as a psychologist and a psychoanalyst, and my specialty is working with some of the most traumatized people in the world. Well, you know what? Almost all of the 250 people I've painted and gotten to know, and they signed a release, and I'm a psychoanalyst, so I spent hours and hours with them, interviewing them about their lives. And almost every single one of them was a major trauma survivor before they were homeless, contributing to their homelessness. And once they were on the streets, they were repetitively traumatized, many times by other people physically and emotionally attacking them. And it's a tragedy. And people who talk about homeless people, if they just worked harder, they start so far behind. Incest, abuse, torture, lack of education, neglect. They're stacked against them. And we need to give them a hand up and a hand out. And it's very personal to me because there, for the grace of God, go I. I'm a trauma survivor myself. And I feel like I got ahead because the government helped me. I went to public schools. I went to a public college. I went to a public doctorate program. I got scholarships. The government, the people, the society invested in me. And I feel like it's my turn to give back to society because my cup runneth over. I was helped. I think I should help others.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I didn't have a lot of experience with working with homeless before this project. I do have a lot of experience photographing in groups of people who have experienced trauma similar to yours. I worked one of my first projects that got national attention were portraits of Holocaust survivors that would begin to share their stories. This was around the time of Schindler's List and survivors who had for years and years not told their stories but kept it to themselves or maybe shared with other survivors or their spouses who were Holocaust survivors, but they wouldn't tell their children. It was not done. And so I worked with them, and then after that, I worked with war veterans, Vietnam War veterans. That was the war of my generation. And though I was not in the war, I had a lot of friends who were. And we talked about Vietnam War veterans as well as a homeless population as well, but the people that I worked with none of them were homeless. But I photographed them and let them tell the world about their war stories and what it was like to have your best friend die in your arms. And clearly they were experiencing trauma. And one of the veterans said, after one of the museum shows, we did a panel discussion like this, and he said, "Did you ever think of photographing the other side?" Well, yeah, but how do we do that? I don't speak Vietnamese, and how do we find these people and so on? And he said, "I don't think it'd be so hard." So I got some grant money, and I took him with me to Vietnam twice, and we spent about 2 weeks each time, once in the north and once in the south. And through the Ministry of Culture in Vietnam, we photographed and interviewed lots and lots of people. And it was a really beautiful experience, but clearly they had experienced very similar trauma. For example, their nightmares match. The typical nightmare that soldiers have is that they're out on patrol, they get separated from their unit, they hide under a bush when they hear the enemy coming, and at the last minute they see somebody coming towards them and they lift up the bush, and then they're having a nightmare, they start screaming. I mean, yeah. It turned out that the Vietnamese had the same nightmares.
Yes, people are people.
People are people. After that, I photographed, at a certain point years ago, I photographed people in a Section 8 housing project in Bloomington. It was the 80s, and it was the Reagan era when a lot of people were let up, and they closed a lot of the mental health facilities. But there was also a lot about crime and welfare. That was the Reagan era. And in addition to letting people out of the mental health facilities, there was a lot of discussion about welfare queens and people taking handouts and so on. And I really wanted to look at that group. My experience, I didn't have experience in that regard. I grew up in a middle-class suburban household. My father grew up in enormous poverty. Like there were no social services when he grew up and where he grew up, and it was really hard. Even though he wound up having a job and a family and a suburban life, the trauma of his childhood never escaped him. It just colored all of his life. So I went to photograph. I wanted to know more about how that works. So I went to the Section 8 housing projects in Bloomington, Indiana. I taught photography for decades at Indiana University. And I became picture man. I was the guy who came every week to photograph whoever would let me photograph them and to tell me their stories. Well, I didn't have to ask, they would just tell me their stories. And then I did that for 4 or 5 years. I got a Guggenheim Fellowship to complete the project, but didn't. Instead, I embarked on the Holocaust project. But so flash forward 25 years, I moved to Chicago, and well, no, this is before Chicago. I was, I always thought that was a good project and good portraits. And I went to my gallery dealer and I said, I'd like to do something with these photographs from 25 years ago. And she said, well, you need to bring them up to date. And I thought, yeah, she's right. So I started going back to the housing projects to look for the same people. So I went with a box of prints, and whoever was out, I said, do you know any of these people? And they would leaf through and I don't know these people. And finally, a woman said, yeah, I know, that's my cousin, and I can take you to her. And it went from there. It turns out that Facebook is a good way to connect with groups. And so I wound up rephotographing 100 people that I photographed 25 years earlier. And looked at the trajectory of their lives. The reason I'm telling you the story is that several of the individuals 25 years later were homeless. Wow. And but they were, when I interviewed them and photographed them, and they were very open about their experiences with me because they knew who I was and so on. They trusted me. When I moved to Chicago after I retired from teaching, I lived downtown. And homelessness, it's a very different kind of homelessness. It's one that you see in cities, people living on the streets. And I was curious about that. So even though my experience with homelessness were few and far between, I had some, but not a lot. I thought, well, this could be my Chicago project. I would like to find out how people wind up like this, in living this life. And so I thought, well, I could just photograph them, but that's not who I am. There's somebody sleeping on a heating grid. I don't do that. I need informed consent. I want people to know who I am and what I do, and willingly participate in sharing their stories, even though, as Stuart was saying, these stories are difficult and traumatic to read up. So I thought, well, I'll find good agencies that work with homeless. These are the professionals that do this every day, like you do, and I was lucky to meet the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And I met with them and showed them my Pigeon Hill project, the people living in housing projects over a 25-year period. The book had just been published. And they said, yeah, we'll work with you, we'll partner with you. And so I began to, the first people that I met were people that are their leaders, people who were formerly homeless, or sometimes homeless now, but mostly had experienced homelessness, but were now not. They were housed. And they would go out into the shelters and they would help homeless people find resources. So the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless is an advocacy group. They do a lot of legal work. They help people deal with tenant, landlord disputes, things of that sort. And that's what they were the ones that helped me, and they educated me. They really let me know that, in fact, the people that I wanted to photograph, the people that are the stereotype of homelessness as someone who's mentally ill or a drug addict, that's actually fewer than half of the population of homelessness. That most homeless are invisible. They're living doubled up with family, women who've left domestic abuse situations, people who are living in shelters. There are so many ways in which people can be homeless and become homeless: job loss, foreclosure, coming out as gay. There are so many ways. And so I wanted to work with that demographic. And I did work with some who are the stereotypes, who do have addiction and mental health issues, but the majority of the people that I worked with do not, and they're the invisible ones. And I wanted them to tell their stories and bring that to the public. Because if we're going to solve this crisis, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. You have to know the demographic. This person who's left domestic violence, who's educated, needs, and as their children, they need childcare. They need a place, a roof over their head. They need affordable housing. Somebody with mental health issues, clearly, there was a guy walking down the street today while I was driving who was just screaming his head off. He was talking to no one, to himself. And he needs something that they don't need. He needs intervention of some sort. The professional, work that Stuart and people like that do, like you do.
I think it's incredible. I love the way you both have really captured this population. You really, we often refer to the homeless population, as you mentioned, the invisible population. Not only is it difficult to find where they are often doubled up, or some of them don't want to be seen, and a lot of people tend to ignore this population, whether they're walking by on the streets, they see someone in need, it's either out of guilt or out of fear. They're afraid to make that transaction and approach. So what you've done here with your work is really, it's such a contrast. You've really shed light on this community, on these people and their stories. As I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the work, it's a different experience being here inside the exhibit. If you haven't checked it out yet, please make sure to come down in person and look at the work. I mean, the size and just, it's a different experience here. So with that said, I want to ask you I know, Stuart, you spent 40 years, inside your office and dealing with trauma, people with different backgrounds. You both have extensive experience. What motivated you, or what inspired you to actually step into their environment for a change?
Well, again, my model of doing this work is participant observer. Now, that's a model from sociology and anthropology, where I actually literally become part of their community and see them from their own experience, where I spent nights out with them in their living situation. I spent time getting to know them. I've been walking the same streets for 12 years. Really, and gaining the trust of homeless people to participate in the process and really be interviewed and painted is a dance of gaining trust. And then now, as I walk down the street, people will say, "I'm next, you painted too, why aren't you painting me? I have a great face too." And they really want to be painted. Some people who've been painted say, "Now I'm immortal." Or when I told a woman that her portrait was in Mayor Garcetti's office of Los Angeles for the last year and a half, she said, "Now I feel free from being nothing and a nothing." Or one guy said he felt like Jesus for a day, where he felt like he was an important person. And I give them photographs of the paintings and envelopes, and they write home and they send pictures of a famous artist painting their portrait. And those, many of those are on the mantelpieces of their family. So the black sheep of their family has this portrait and it's now on their mantelpiece. I want to shine a light, like Katie Kulitz. She's a really fabulous artist in Germany during the Nazis, actually. And she says, my art has a purpose, to shine a light on the suffering of man, to influence people in this perplexed time of life in the world. And that's what I want to do. I want to document the sin upon the soul of our society, that we are allowing people to die on the streets, and that we are not really mobilizing and declaring an emergency, that we can send troops all over the world, we can do all sorts of things, we can build big buildings. Why aren't we taking care of our own? And many homeless people are very angry about that. And I think that during COVID, things have gotten worse. We have to understand that the homeless population has grown, and that there are many, many wonderful organizations, be they faith-based, or I've worked with the city extensively, I've worked with the county extensively, and to help them develop programs, to help with publicizing. And these are really dedicated people. But for every person they house, there's 2 or 3 more who are losing their homes, and we need to target the people who are vulnerable for losing their homes and their apartments. We need to really be aware that these are people who are earnestly trying. No one, when I've really interviewed them for hours, wants to be homeless. That's a fantasy people sell. These are industrious people. They go around, they collect cans from garbage cans, and then they get $750 tickets from taking a garbage can out of a trash can, and they can't afford that ticket, so they end up going to jail. And it's 43%, it's documented, it's 43% cheaper to give a homeless person services and wraparound housing in terms of mental health services, occupational training, and all sorts of things than to leave them on the streets, because they account many times for more than half the police time, more than half the fire engine, emergency calls, 911 calls, and then hospital emergency rooms are flooded with homeless people. And that's the most expensive way of taking care of them. And we need to be a caring society. It's not only moral and ethical, it's also financially tremendously cheaper. And so we're being a harsh and cruel. Philip Anston, the United Nations does a site visit to every nation in the world for human rights, for care, health care, for child care, all sorts of different things. And they said that the site visit by Philip Anston from the Great Britain said that we are unusually mean and cruel to our poor, that we stigmatize them, and that we are the champion of income inequality that contributes to homelessness. So I think that it's important for us to realize that this is a public policy priority decision. Many years ago, there wasn't as many homeless problem. And what's happened is that we've become more gentrified and more income inequality, and that we deprive them of the regular services and have cut programs rather than increase programs. LA area, the city has passed bond issues, the county has passed bond issues, but this federal government has been, at least under the previous administration, cut almost every single one of those programs. And so the actual amount of money getting to homeless people was reduced because of the federal cuts. So we have to work as a nation together to become a more caring community.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about that. I know that we were cut significantly in federal funds. More than 70% of our funding that was allocated for supportive services for our continuum was reduced.
It's reduced.
So a lot of agencies are dealing with where do we leverage these funds? How do we support our programs? How do we support our staff? There's staff capacity issues. There's, everyone's stretched so thin, but the social services piece is so critical. And
Absolutely.
we've seen more than 70% of our funds.
There are programs with documented effectiveness to eradicate homelessness. Utah, in 4 years, reduced its homeless population 95%. And we can do that through a program called Housing First. First give housing, because Gandhi said we should evaluate a country and a civilization based on how it treats its weakest and less functional people. And we get a failing grade. We get a failing grade. And yet incomes of CEOs have gone through the roof, and billionaires are getting richer and richer by the moment, and the poor are getting poorer and poorer and can't afford housing. And when the moratorium on evictions ends, we're going to have a landslide of increased homelessness. And we need to take stock and come together as a group. Almost every religion I know of has a saying, something like the golden rule: treat others as you wish to be treated yourself.
Yes.
And so I want, my goal in my life and my life mission for my entire life has been to shine a light on the oppression and the neglect of the underprivileged.
Absolutely. Love your neighbor as yourself. I always say, treat others the way you would want to be treated. And what you both have done is completely transformed the lives of these individuals. What were some of, I know that in your photography, did you share this work with these wonderful individuals? And what was their response to their own painting? I'm curious to know, what type of response did you get when you showed them your work?
Well, I do a lot of photographs in a session and then print them. And if I like them, once I've decided these are the ones that work, you notice too, I work text into the image. It becomes an integral part. It's not just the photograph, it's also the story, but it's woven visually into the story. And that's what I'm known. I'm the text guy, And at first I was with the Holocaust stories. They were handwritten, which made it very personal. Some people thought this is a more typographic look. I studied typography and loved letter forms, So I had to find ways to integrate it in various sections of the photograph. I give everybody a copy of the photograph, and they love them. Now, for some people who are on the streets, having stuff is hard to maintain, whether it's the book, a print, whatever. But since many of the people that I photograph are housed in shelters, or they have their own places now, they're very proud of them. To go back to the previous Pigeon Hill stuff and the housing projects, when I went back 25 years later, my portraits were still hanging on their wall. So I think there's a pride because I let people, it's their stories. They tell me it's first person, it's their narratives. And they trust me to share that with the world, with the viewers. And I'm proud of that. I work hard for them to trust me and for them to tell their stories in a way that's not varnished in any way, that's raw. Sometimes while they're telling me their stories, they start crying because it's painful memories. And I show them the text to make sure that they're comfortable with what I'm using. If they're not, I change it to whatever it is that they want. It's their story.
Hey, Stuart, do you have any interesting stories?
Oh, I have a lot of interesting stories.
I'm sure you do.
Well, up here, this is Jake. If we can zoom in on Jake. Jake, it's a very powerful story because he worked downtown New York City and was a electrician, and he did very well, had a house, had a summer house, had multiple cars, and was very wealthy because he worked
outfitting all these big buildings, and he worked in the Twin Tower building. And he was actually a contractor with other buildings in the area and was just a couple blocks away. During 9/11, when the planes crashed into the building, he heard the explosions. He ran over to see what was happening. He tried to get in the building because his whole crews were up there, and he tried to get up and things were falling down, so he had to go out. And then he saw people that he knew were friends of his for many years jumping from the building to their death. He had a terrible case of survivor guilt, began drinking, taking drugs. Eventually his wife left him. He left and he was homeless on the streets, and he wandered the streets for 18 years. And then I met him on Venice Beach. This is a case of intense trauma. If you are run over by a car, you are taken to the hospital and helped. If you are traumatized, they leave you alone and don't help you. This is Jacqueline, who was, she had a very difficult childhood, but she was in college and doing very well, getting A's in college. Some people broke into her apartment. She was gang raped. I'm sorry if it's too intense. And then, she fell apart. She completely fell apart and didn't get help. And then she's been on the streets since then. I want to tell you a success story all the way over here. This is a sad story. This is Cabral, and he had a wife he loved tremendously, and 11 children. And he was a scuba diver instructor, a sailing instructor, and a lobster diver. So he was in the Marquis Caribbean Islands. And the islands were so close together, you always got in a boat and went to another island. But his wife and many of his children and aunts and uncles all went to visit another relative on a different island. A hurricane came up quickly, the boat sank, and they all died. And ever since then, he's been drinking, taking drugs to medicate. So a lot of the drug and alcohol use that you see in homelessness is to medicate the trauma that no one is attending to, and that if you sleep on the cement for days at a time, you end up with so much back pain that you're going to drink too to medicate. And then he was on Venice Beach. Slowly, he started getting odd jobs and started painting people's apartments and fixing things. And actually, he started a business where he took bikes and put electric motors on it. So he built electric bikes and sold them. So he actually has an apartment now. So these are really intense stories. This is Marion, whose mother was a prostitute, and he's probably the product of that. But he loved his mother tremendously. But he's been on the streets so long, he's HIV positive, and he's gay. And so he feels like he's gotten beat up. This is Coco. It's a man. He was a man, and now he's a woman. And he was a football star. He was prom king at a local, very ritzy high school. But the only place he feels accepted is in Skid Row. He feels like he's been beaten and attacked for being transgender, and that there's no safe place, and he feels most at home there. There are many success stories too, but what I want to say to you is this is now an epidemic and cannot be solved by faith-based organizations. We need intense public, governmental, national emergency policy making where we really go towards a national program, because LA and California shoulders more of the burden than we should be. It should be. Many judges in other states are giving the homeless people in different states tickets to come to LA, and we are having to pay the price. We need a national commitment to this work.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, did you want to share any of the stories?
Sure. I'll start with with Mexico. She was one of the first people that I photographed. She's a leader of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. She never lived on the street, but she was she was a single mom raising 3 kids, taking them to school, picking them up, and was working on her bachelor's degree while raising the kids. Wound up being diagnosed with breast cancer. They misdiagnosed it. It was much worse than they thought, so she had to have radical surgery and chemo therapy. All the life savings that all the money she'd been saving to buy her own house, she had a down payment ready, had to go into her medical care. The United States doesn't do very much to help people with doctor bills. And so she wound up in shelters. So the shelters are a mixed bag. Some are very good, some are horrible. It just depends. And the first one she wound up with was terrible. They didn't have doors on their room. They had no privacy. She wound up eventually in a better shelter. But when I met her, she had, through an agency, got her own apartment through Chicago Housing Authority. And I love that the way she got, when I was coming over to take her picture, she dressed everybody up in these beautiful clothes. You know, it's like old time, I'm being photographed, let's get dressed up, you know? And then she still has some medical issues, so she's in a kind of a walker. But you can tell there's so much love in this family, and she's been such a great mom. When I photographed her, she was almost done with her bachelor's degree. She subsequently got her bachelor's degree, just got her master's degree in business administration, and wants me to take her graduation picture. So that's definitely a success story. They're not all success stories. Yeah, this woman, Char, lives in Venice Beach. She's lives with her husband and her dog. He got her a dog for a birthday present. She talks about it when you go in the shelters. Many of the shelters, well, most of the shelters won't let you be your husband, your spouse, you know, or your pets. They take your pets away. And so here she's loving on her dog and she's happy, but she talks about why she left our small town in Tennessee and wound up here in California, and talked about, she goes, she gets Section 8 vouchers and they live in a place, but otherwise she panhandles. And she goes, when me and Laz have no money, I'll panhandle. I want to get off the streets like everyone else. It's not fun to have people look at you like they do. One time I was just walking when a man called me garbage. It made me really depressed. And that's kind of what Stuart was talking about. Tom has become a friend of mine. He's the mayor of Tent City. He actually does like living outside. He's been homeless off and on for his whole life. This is a story that you hear over and over again. His parents died. So death of a spouse, death of a partner, death of a parent really drives homelessness. And he was a kid. His father died when he was 6. His mom when he was 12. He and his siblings lived with their uncle, but the life there wasn't good, and he was always bucking up against his uncle's authority, and he left home when he was 14. There's a lot of runaways, and you hear a lot about teens, and he wound up homeless off and on for much of his life. Had jobs, and had some medical issues that made working physical labor difficult. He'd heard about Uptown Tent City. So this is an encampment under the Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. And he really was excited about being part of it. There's a hierarchy in some of these encampments. There are people who take on different authorities, your security, your administration, and they look out for each other. They watch each other's stuff and protect each other. And so he liked that. And he became the mayor of Tent City. He was elected in this little organization of maybe 50 people in the encampment. He periodically winds up in an apartment. He qualifies for housing, and he lives out in a building. He likes the community. And so goes periodically back and forth. It's episodic. These two young men were, I met them through SPY, through the Safe Place for Youth here in Venice Beach. And this is a wonderful organization that you talked about faith-based agencies. This is a not-for-profit that a visionary woman from Australia started just to help kids, just to help youth. It's a very loving environment. The kids come, they ask, no questions are asked. They can do their homework, they can take art classes, they can learn to write, they have music classes, they have a shelter. Many of the kids are just drop-ins from time to time. And these two are part of, of that community. So yeah, some of the stories there are, everyone has an amazing backstory.
Right, absolutely. And I love how you both have captured that. It's so thought-provoking. And when you look at this, you want to find out more. And you want to find out where they are now. And do you both still keep in touch with these individuals?
Quite a few of these I have like 4 and 5 and 6 year follow-ups on. And but a lot of them are still on the beach, still in the Skid Row, still on the streets. The amount that really get out of homelessness isn't real high. It's very sad. And over the years, like over this 12-year period that I've been tracking a lot of these people I've painted, I watched them deteriorate, and a whole chunk of them have died on the streets, died of untreated medical conditions that could have been easily treated if they were caught early and due to violence and actually due to suicide. People just feeling so despondent and hopeless that they kill themselves. So I feel bad being the messenger of sadness, but this is a sad topic. This is tragedy, and we are all responsible. I don't know, I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish religion, there's a concept of we are all responsible for each other. And also that we are each responsible for tikkun olam, which is actually repairing the world, that their world is torn and broken, and that it is each of our responsibilities to do something to repair the world. And that when we die, or in quotes, we meet God, in quotes. I'm not even sure I believe in God, but the idea is that he asks you, the first question he asks you is, what have you done to help prepare the world and make it a better place? And I think that we all should be responsible.
We are absolutely responsible. I think we become desensitized, especially for me when we run programs, frontline staff, people out there in the community, outreach, from A through Z, different types of services we provide. It's so fast paced and it's such a heavy topic. And a lot of the staff, they experience burnout and they do become desensitized as well. So that's why it's so important to capture these stories and to have individuals, artists like you, to really spend time and spend that one-on-one with these people to hear their story. Everyone has a different story, and sometimes we try to fit everyone in a box. And we have these, we tend to judge this population. Well, they don't want to work, they're too lazy, or, substance abuse. It's like, well, which came first, homelessness or substance abuse? There's a lot of trauma, as you mentioned. And how do we help lift these people up? We don't want to push them down by focusing on their vulnerabilities and triggering that trauma, further triggering their trauma. So I love the way you both have captured their stories, and what a way to lift them up, lift these individuals up and into the spotlight. So I thank you both for doing that. I do have a question. I was wondering if, I know, and the reason why I asked this question is for our outreach team, and when we often connect with the homeless population, sometimes it could be so overwhelming, emotionally, mentally, and getting the buy-in from these individuals to work with us and to get services, to connect with us. It's quite difficult, and it could be really tough on us too. So just out of curiosity, I know you both have extensive experience dealing with trauma, right? Different forms out on the field, in the office. What were some of the struggles you experienced personally doing this?
Well, I remember when I first started working in the mental health field, which was like about 50 years ago. And I was working with children in the Kings Park State Hospital, and they're 8-year-olds, and they were hospitalized. And they're really rough kids. Actually, at one time, they worked as a team. One kid kneeled down, and the other kid ran into me, and I was knocked over, and it was really like, it was like they loved me, these 8-year-olds. But, you know, over time, I felt like really sad about it, and I was not going to go back. And then I thought, if I didn't go back, then they wouldn't have that. So I think you have to think about what you're giving to people, and people are so grateful. I just like many times a small interaction can be something that really profoundly helps them. This one of the people I work with is a success story. She was in the Fresh Air program when she was in New York State, and she went upstate New York, and they would bear her with a family upstate New York on a farm, and she spent just one summer up there. And she was actually being incested at home and beaten and all sorts of terrible things. But then she went and lived with this lovely family for one summer. And you know, that gave her hope for her whole life. And that's why she kept fighting and kept moving, and has now gotten a job and is raising her kids and is doing really well. And so you never know what small interactions can really do. I also want to say that, you know, we've been focusing again on the trauma, and I'm a trauma expert, internationally known, with 3 books and 30 publications in prestigious journals. But we have to look at their strengths. There are professional football players I've met who are homeless. There are lawyers. There are double PhDs. There are stockbrokers. There are really talented people who, if we can give them a helping hand, they can really rejoin our society. They have great skills. We have to not just be looking at their deficits, but we have to look at their strengths and build on their strengths. I'm a believer in that you don't just focus on their deficits, you build on the strengths, and you give them a team, and you help them compensate for their difficulties, but you go full strength and full force on a person's strengths and build them, because that's what will make them successful. And I want to say that this has been one of the most inspiring experiences of my life. I've gotten to know some of the people I enjoy the most. I would say some of my best friends are homeless people. I see them on a regular basis. It breaks my heart, but it's also, you know, if I want to have dinner, lunch with a friend of mine who's another psychoanalyst, they say, well, in June, on the second week of June at 12 o'clock on a Thursday, I could talk to you. I can just walk down and talk to these people at any time, 24 hours a day, and I do. And they're some of the most wonderful people, and they help each other. And there's this group of guys who've all lost their spouses, and they sit together all the time for years, and they help each other, and they're a team. They protect each other. They have a support group. They really are a community, and they really are together. And that's why you can understand why some of them may not want to leave their support group, this close-knit group.
What about you, Jeffrey?
What was the question?
What were some of the struggles that you experienced being out in that environment and on the field doing the work? Did you go through any kind of, you know, I was mentioning that sometimes it's so heavy on us as service providers, you know, the emotional stress that comes with it and the struggles. Was there any point during this journey for you where you felt like, okay, I need to take a step back, or any struggles that you came across personally?
With this series, of course, you know, when people are telling you their deepest, darkest secrets and the things that make them sad, depressed, if you're human, it affects you. And I became close with a number of these individuals, and I follow up. And you know, I had, he's not up on this wall, but on the other wall outside, David Bush, who's homeless and an advocate for homelessness in Venice Beach. And we had lunch today. We had a lovely time, and he's brilliant. He's college educated. He really is a staunch advocate for the rights of homeless people. And he's become kind of a spokesman, you know, for them. And so when I come here to Venice, I always want to meet with him and spend time with him. He's the one wearing the thing that says "be love," and he's a compassionate, intelligent person who really understands what homelessness means. So he schooled me. I really learned more from these individuals and from these organizations than they learned from me. I really became a vessel to get their stories out, have their faces out there, so that they can, express themselves, and people can, like Char said, we're not garbage, we're humans.
What better way to learn than to speak and interact with people with lived experience who are out there day to day experiencing homelessness, living in that lifestyle. We actually have a question.
We have a question from the audience. Are they open to receiving help? Is the question, can you share a bit about what makes them hesitant to receive support and what are the roadblocks there?
I think a lot of these people who are on the streets are there because they've been traumatized by other people. So gaining their trust is really hard. And if you think about someone who's trapped and raped and beaten, it's many times even just going into an enclosed space, which is called a room, can trigger the fear of being trapped and being abused. So they're very easily re-triggered. So you have to develop trust. And when I started going out there, it was very interesting. Most of the homeless people were convinced I was a narc, that I was an undercover police officer that was going to arrest them for drug dealing. You know what I mean? And it took years for me to gain the trust. And now I mean, after doing it 12 years, they finally realized he's just a crazy guy. He gives out money and food and clothing and helps people, but this is kind of an idiot, isn't he? What are you doing that? But so there are a lot of obstacles to gaining trust and then dealing with the traumas which are actively being activated and relived and enacted. So they can and then there's a lot of defensiveness. So I've actually had knives pulled on me, my life threatened in these situations. So I'm not encouraging, small, nice, I don't want to be tacky people, but to just go out and hang out with homeless people, not a good idea. And children should not. So you really need to go together as a buddy team. I don't, but you should. And think about your own safety in that situation as well.
And that is why I asked what motivated you or inspired you to step into their environment, because it's not an easy environment to step into. There are a lot of challenges, especially walking down Skid Row. I was so amazed to see that you're just walking down, setting up, your easel, and it's not as easy as it looks. That's why it's so fascinating and amazing to see that these people actually connected with you and were willing to sit there for hours for you to paint.
It's really, when I first went down to Skid Row, I met Peggy, and she was, she used to be in the Army, and I was frightened because Skid Row is pretty dangerous and it's pretty frightening. And she said, well, and she patted her pocket, she says, I have a gun here, I'll take care of you. So for the first, 5 or 6 times, I only stayed within visual. I went to Skid Row, but I stayed within visual in direct sight of Peggy till I learned. And then I learned that I had to dress down and look like a homeless person. And I carried my stuff in a valise, which was torn, and I wore torn clothes. And then I wasn't just like a white boy who was going to be shot or mugged.
That's wonderful. And I love what you said earlier, to build on their strengths. I was actually reflecting on the work. I was reflecting on the photographs and the portraits, and this thought just came into my mind. I had this moment of realization. When our clients come to our to get services, we often have them complete a survey right off the bat. We complete an assessment. That's the first thing you do in programs. And it's called a vulnerability index. It's called a VI SPEDAC to be exact. So you basically assess them, and based on their score, you determine how vulnerable these individuals are. And sometimes we want to fit them into this box. They have to fit every single question. They have to answer every question. And during this process, we tend to pick on their vulnerabilities. And I have that shift, you know, when I was reflecting on the work, that no, we actually need to work to build these people up and focus on their strengths because they have so much more to offer.
But let me just take it out a step further. Okay, think about this. A person comes in, they're frightened to death of another human being. They've been beaten to hell. They're starving. And you hand them this questionnaire and you say, you have to fill out every box. You have to tell us, were you abused?
Right.
Tell me on this sheet and write it down. That is a violation. That's completely not meeting the person where they are. You have to gain their trust. So many people told me about the horrible things that happened to them, but years into my relationship with them. So I'm sorry to tell you that I think this initial assessment is inaccurate.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. I think there needs to be a complete shift. We need to build rapport with these people. We need to gain their trust, hear their stories, and then kind of figure out a way to help them out from the program perspective. But that's one of the things, and I haven't thought about it initially because I thought, well, it's a requirement, you know, you've got to get it done. But these people are already experiencing so much trauma, and you don't want to trigger that trauma any further, and they don't want to deal with that. So when that question comes up is, are these people open to services? Well, yes, I think they are, but it needs to be more client-centered services, not program-centered services. I think we really need to spend more time with our clients to hear their stories, focus on their strengths, build them up, lift them out of homelessness, not push them further down. So that was a moment of realization that I had. It was like an epiphany, and I had to share that with both of you. I thank you for that. As a service provider, you know, as a manager of homeless programs, that realization for me is going to go far. And I plan on pushing that further to our service providers.
To hand people who are in desperate need lots of pieces of paper is not a great way to start. And a lot of them talk about they don't have ID. Every homeless people's stuff is stolen all the time. They lose everything. And so many times most don't have IDs. They don't have identification, then they can't get services. And then a lot of them are freaked out. They are having trouble reading. Some of them never learned to read. And then they're handed reams of paper to fill out. And that what they tell me is, I can't go through that process. It's too demanding, it's too upsetting. You're asking about all the traumas I've ever had. I don't know who you are. Why should I trust you? Why should I tell you that? The way in which these services are designed does not fit the clients they're trying to treat.
I'm coming from a very different perspective because almost all the people that I work with, I've met through services.
Yes.
Organizations that like Safe Place for Youth, like Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, like Venice Community Housing, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council. I'm introduced to these people through organizations that are serving their needs. And again, my approach is very different than Stuart's. I'm working with the invisible homeless, the majority of homeless, who we don't see. What we're seeing here is the stereotypes for the most part, the people who are visible out on the streets, maybe talking to themselves, maybe, you know, asking for money. I have a little of that in my project, but for the most part, I'm working with people that you don't see, the homeless you don't see, who have very different needs.
Well, I don't know. I didn't like what you said right there, because I'll say to you very clearly, I'm not sure that you're talking about the majority. The people who can navigate, you know, I had a friend who became homeless. I have 2 PhDs. My wife has a master's. We're very high-level professionals. It took us a year and a half working the system and having computers, having telephone numbers to get someone housing. So people who can get to housing through the programs we're talking about, they are a select group.
I will defer to the professionals that I've worked with, Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, et cetera. You can have your opinion, and let's leave it at that.
I think homelessness, you know, it's a different experience for everyone. And I think it's the level of homelessness too that you deal with. I think some of the people that you work with, these are what we refer to as the chronically homeless population. I mean, these are people who have been on the streets for years and years and years. And then sometimes we do see the invisible, right? We see people who experience, you know, homelessness on and off. You know, one of the things we're looking at is how do we reduce recidivism? Because so many people get housed and then they can't even maintain their housing past a year. So then the wraparound services, right? The ongoing case management. How do we help these people stay housed? Because I think housing them is one thing, but helping them maintain their housing and working towards self-sufficiency, that's the challenging part. And I think there is a great disconnect. I think right now we have such a unique opportunity. We have more funding now than we've ever had. Less funding in social services, yes, direct services, but we do have more funding now historically. I mean, just in the city of Glendale, we received over 225 housing vouchers, emergency housing vouchers. These people can get housed quickly, but there is a disconnect. I think we need to strengthen our connection with our mainstream service providers, our regional connection. We need to get the community more involved. And I think our staff and the people who are working day in and day out need to have that trauma-informed care. They have to have that understanding that these people, the population that they're working with, and that's where sometimes I feel like we do become a bit desensitized, and it takes our clients such a long time to navigate through the system that they get discouraged. And that is the experience that I've had too. How can we look at ways of streamlining the process, making it more client-friendly, client-centered? That's kind of what I've seen, but I do understand your perspective too. We have some incredible organizations that do so much work. Oh, they work so hard. I know here in Glendale, we're a smaller COC, and I could tell you our providers are pretty amazing at what they do. You pick up a phone call and within 3 minutes, they respond, within 3 minutes. And it's incredible to see the work they do, but can we do more? Yes, absolutely. Do we need more support? Absolutely. Do we need more training? And do we need this human compassion that you guys have displayed? I think this is a great need. Understanding people on a personal level, connecting, that cultural humility. There's a lot of segregation right now between the housed and the unhoused. How do we break down that barrier? I think
I also want to compliment you, Jeff. This is a beautiful project you did, and I think it's really a tremendous service to our society, and I want to thank you for it. Thanks.
Thank you both. It's incredible. All right, I wanted to ask you guys one more question. What do you want the community, for the audience tonight? I want to thank the audience for tuning in. What do you want them to take away from this work that you have done? What is that call to action? What is that one message that you want to convey to our audience?
Well, that we are all just people. People are people, and we're all one thin experience from being traumatized such that we cannot function, and that people who are very successful can lose a wife, a spouse, and be completely devastated. And that we all need to work together to create a caring community that helps each other make it through each day.
Yeah, these are individuals, these are people, and homelessness could happen to anyone. And many of these people that I worked with tell the same tale about that. Again, you're a kid whose parents died and you're on the street. Is that your fault? Do we have no responsibility as a society to care for that individual? A woman who's leaving domestic violence relationship with kids, what do we owe that person? How can we help? These are individuals, and these stories happen. It could happen to anyone.
Absolutely. I actually do want to share a story with the two of you, an experience that I had with a homeless client, and I think it's important to kind of share it with the audience too. There was a female individual named Diane. I had known her for 20 years, working for the city. And at the time she was housed, but you could tell she was kind of spiraling downhill, mental illness. She would show up at different counters within the city, different departments. And, she kept getting kicked out. And so her parents passed away and she ended up becoming homeless. So she spent 8 years on the streets. She was in really terrible condition. Her health was declining, about to lose a leg. And I actually came into my position as a homeless programs manager about 5 months ago. So after about 2 weeks of being in my position, she came to me at the city. Someone had referred her to me. So I started talking to her and she just wouldn't connect with me. We couldn't understand. And she started screaming and she said, why do you want to help me? You don't care. You guys just think, we're a violation, we're garbage. We should just be thrown out, locked up. And I said, I have 3 beautiful girls and you're someone's child. You were someone's baby. And if God forbid something happened to me and my children were in that situation, or for anyone, friends, family, I would want somebody to lift them up and to help them. That is why I'm doing this. It's not to get you off the street, And then after 3 months, I had this employee, he was incredible, showing that radical love, going out there, showing compassion, working with the community. He said, I want to help her. Give me 3 months. I said, okay. Spent 5-6 times a day with her for 3 months. Take her to get food, take her to her appointments, just showing her that unconditional love and support. After 3 months, 7 units that she declined. The 8th unit, she said, you know what? I'll take it. And she is now housed after 8 years. But it took us 3 months, day in, day out, to get her to where she needed to be. She wanted to feel empowered. She wanted to have a choice. She wanted to have a voice. And we gave that to her. We were patient. My team, he was incredible. Alejandro, if you're tuning in tonight, thank you. And then she came back to see me after a month. And the first thing she told me was, how are your children? How are your girls doing? That is the first statement she made.
That's beautiful.
And I said, they are great. Thank you for asking.
And that's what it takes. It takes that level of working with people and being there. And the people on the streets, they want to be housed. They want to go to those services you're talking about in those organizations. But it's very scary for them, and they're easily believing that no one will help them. And there's a lot of barriers to getting services.
And I mean, she's still struggling. She still wakes up and she can't believe that she has a roof over her head. She's struggling with that idea of being housed. And that's why that ongoing care, I don't like to call it case management. I like to call it care management. That's the real struggle for us now, is how do we maintain that for them? How do we help them become more self-sufficient?
And they do need ongoing help for many years. Just even a person to speak to every once in a while, to bounce ideas off of, so that they know how to manage their lives.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions, Laura, from the audience?
No, that was that one question that we had.
Okay, so what about, I wanted to mention that
absolutely.
My new book, and
Yes.
Jeff has a beautiful new book. I really like his book. So mine is called Open Your Heart to Art, and it's all about how to use the paintings and their stories as a way to deepen yourself as a human being and develop self-knowledge and to appreciate the vulnerability of all human beings and each of us and how we need to be together. It's on sale on Amazon.com.
Yes, my book, published by Cabral, is now available. It's being launched March 15th officially, but the publisher tells me that all the bookstores online and brick and mortar have the book available now.
And my website is stuartperlmanartist.com. So stuartperlmanartist.com.
JeffreyWollan.com.
I went to his website. It's very lovely.
Thank you, Stuart.
Wonderful. Oh, and your we didn't show the trailer, the video, but you do have a documentary, Struggling Care
Yes,
Price.
I have a documentary that has won multiple awards, Best Movie of the Year, National Association of Advancement of Psychoanalysis. I won an award from American Psychological Association and from the Pasadena International Film Festival. It's called Struggle in Paradise. You can go to my website and see it for free. You don't have to pay anything. Just go to my website, go to the documentary page and punch it, and you'll go to Vimeo and you can see the whole thing for free.
Make sure to check it out. It does bring these pictures to life. So I thank you both so much for being here this evening. It was such a pleasure for me to serve.
And thank you both, this whole organization, Ara and Anahid, and it's been, you guys have been great.
Thanks so much.
And make sure to check out the exhibition. It's going to be running through March 4th, correct? Yes, so March 4th. Please come down in person. You won't regret it. You have to see this in person, experience it in person. So thank you, everyone.